Welcome to the mythical world of Elestrals. My name is Dan and I go by aDrive online and I am the creator of the Elestrals franchise. Throughout this video, I'm going to teach you exactly how to play Elestrals by breaking down every single step of the gameplay. And you can check out the rest of the channel to see deck profiles for each of the 5 starter decks available in prototype purchase, as well as some gameplay videos to get a full understanding of how the game actually plays. I think you'll really enjoy it. This really takes a lot of the elements from some of the most popular card games in the world, spins them on their head with a unique mechanic, and really creates a very fun environment. I'm going to be reading from a script, which you can also find in the description below if that's your kind of thing, alongside a ton of other videos and links that you can check out that'll be helpful for your experience in learning Elestrals. Thanks so much for watching. Let's dive into the script. For those who don't know, I developed the Elestrals card game to be accessible for all ages, but with a deep level of gameplay and strategy to allow for the highest levels of competition. In Elestrals, you'll take control of spirit creatures that serve as your life points, energy source, and mana, all combined in a gameplay system never seen before. I encourage you to follow us on social media to stay up to date for our Kickstarter launch planned for November. And for just 72 hours from the time this video goes live, you'll have a chance to pre-order a prototype starter deck to help and join the Elestrals playtests. You can find this limited opportunity at shopelestrals.com, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. We have tournaments planned with these starter decks and much more, so be sure to grab them within the 72-hour window. I should also mention there's no limit to the amount of starter decks you can purchase, so if you want to get 5, 10, 20, whatever suits your boat, you're welcome to do so. I appreciate the support in developing Elestrals. Elestrals features a unique mechanic called Spirits, which will test even the most adept players at resource management. The way these spirits move around the field and interact with Elestrals is just one of the ways the Elestrals card game is changing the way we play. In this video, I'll explain all of the mechanics in Elestrals, including the incredible Nexus Mechanic. Feel free to use the chapters section in the description to jump to topics you need more information about, but I recommend new players watch the entire video. So let's dive in. In the game of Elestrals, there are 3 classifications of cards: Elestral Spirits, Elestrals, and Elestral Runes. First, we're going to take a look at the Elestral Spirits. Elestral Spirits come in 5 different cards at the current time, representing each of the 5 elemental types: Taratlus the Earth Spirit, Vipyro the Fire Spirit, Leviathan the Water Spirit, Lycaris the Wind Spirit, and Zaptor the Thunder Spirit. Each Elestral Spirit serves a multitude of functions in the game. They serve as your life points, your energy resource, as well as your mana. Each Elestrals deck is constructed with a combination of 20 Elestral Spirits. These spirits are held in a separate deck called your Spirit deck. At the highest level of play, it is anticipated that your Spirit deck will contain 3 or more spirit types. So don't expect to just run 20 Leviathan in one Spirit deck. I have a feeling that it's going to be very advantageous to mix things up. Elestrals are the monster cards you play to engage in battle against your opponent. These Elestral monsters feature effects and abilities that can be used to gain an advantage, as well as an attack and defense stat for battle calculation. You may also notice they have an enchantment requirement. That tells you how many type of a spirit you need in order for the Elestral to be enchanted or played on the field. Lastly, we have Elestral Runes. Runes are currently broken into 5 classes: Invoke, Counter, Artifact, Stadium, and Divine Runes. These runes are played in the Runes section of the field and have an enchantment requirement for specific spirits. You can probably already tell that how you manage your spirit deck is going to be very important in playing Elestrals. So let's take a deeper dive into each of these types of cards. Elestral Spirits are fairly simple. Prior to the game starting, you'll determine your 20 spirits you wish to run alongside your main deck. This will form your spirit deck, which is played face down in the bottom left side of your playmat. You're free to search your spirit deck at any time during a game and use the spirits in any order you desire. Your opponent, however, does not have the ability to search your spirit deck, but they may ask to know how many spirits you have left. Certain card effects like Imperial may require you to disclose how many of a particular element spirit you have in your spirit deck. A typical game of Elestrals ends when a player runs out of spirits and is forced to expend or destroy a spirit from their spirit deck. Spirit decks can be constructed with almost any combination of spirits, and the best players are going to determine the right balance to get the most out of their Elestrals. Think of the spirits as your life points, your energy, and your mana, all rolled into one. You can run 20 Taratlus Earth Spirits, or find a more unique combination to use the most powerful Elestral cards. Elestrals and Elestral Runes function very similarly using the Spirit Enchanting mechanic. These 2 types of cards are located in your main deck, which features 40 cards. A player may have up to 3 copies of each card in their main deck. The main deck is separate from your spirit deck and is located in the bottom right of the playing field, played face down. You may only search your main deck when a card effect indicates. Elestrals are played in the top 4 row slots shown here. These Elestrals are the main source of effects in combat in the Elestrals card game. In order to play an Elestral, you must use the mechanic called Enchanting. Enchanting is the act of playing a spirit to the field alongside an Elestral. The Elestral is stacked on top of the spirit and thus uses its elemental powers to get incredible effects. In order for an Elestral or an Elestral rune to remain enchanted on the field, it must have the proper number requirement of spirits on the enchantment requirement in the center of the card. If you have any less, the Elestral and the spirits are destroyed and sent to the underworld. You can, however, have more spirits on an Elestral or a rune, and that is a core strategy to Elestrals card game. It's important to remember the number of spirits is essential for an Elestral to exist, but the type of spirit is not. An Elestral enchanted with an incorrect spirit type can still exist in battle, but it does not have an effect. This is called a misenchanted Elestral. Believe it or not, misenchanting an Elestral can be used to your advantage when setting up for future plays. It's also worth noting that you can misenchant runes too, but they won't have an effect. So in layman's terms, I can have Bag of Winds enchanted on the field with a Thunder and a Fire Spirit, and it'll exist on the field, but it won't have an effect because it doesn't have the 2 Wind Spirits. This Sorlet can be enchanted to the field with 1 Fire Spirit, but again, it won't have an effect, it'll still have its 5 attack and 1 defense. However, this Exaltair with a Wind Spirit has all of the things above, including its effect. In battle, Elestrals utilize 2 different positions on the field. Attack position, which is indicated by a card placed vertically, using its attack stat shown with the sword, and defense position, indicated by a card placed horizontally, using its defense stat shown with a shield. Elestrals are always played face up with their spirits under them, showing their ongoing enchantment. When 2 Elestrals are battling, you use either their position, either attack or defense, to determine which stat is used in calculation. When an Elestral is in attack position, you're going to use their attack stat, and defense position is going to utilize their defense stat. If 2 attack position Elestrals engage in combat, the Elestral with the lower attack stat will be destroyed. If they have the same attack stat, they both get destroyed. If an attack position Elestral attacks a defense position Elestral, and they have the same number stat, or the attack stat is lower, nothing happens and the attack is successfully defended. If the attack stat is higher, then the defense position Elestral is destroyed. The number of enchanting spirits on an Elestral matters. When a defense position Elestral is destroyed, no additional spirits are expended. However, if for example, a 3 spirit enchanted, 7 attack Elestral destroys a 1 spirit enchanted, 6 attack Elestral in attack position, then there's a difference of 2 spirits between them, and thus the opponent must also expend 2 additional spirits in damage. Expending is the act of losing spirits from your spirit deck to the underworld from a card effect. Think of this as direct damage. There are many cards that encourage you to expend or utilize the expending mechanic to activate various effects. To give you an example, I have a Sorlet on the field which is enchanted with 2 Wind Spirits. If it attacks this Elechick with only 1 Thunder Spirit that's in attack position and destroys it, then there is a difference of 1 spirit between the 2 of them. Thus, my opponent is forced to expend 1 additional spirit. If this Elechick had been in defense position, then there's no additional damage that's done because the defense position would defend it. If my Sorlet had another spirit, regardless of the type, it would deal an extra point of damage every spirit above the attack position Elestral that it destroys. And if your opponent has no Elestrals to defend their field, you can actually just attack their spirit deck directly and give damage equal to the number of spirits enchanting the Elestral that is attacking directly. So if this Sorlet were to attack my opponent and they had no Elestrals on the field, they would take 3 damage points in their spirit deck. They would have to expend 3 spirits from their spirit deck. The same would go if I only had 1 or just 2 or whatever it may be, even if the Elestral is misenchanted in this case. Shifting gears, let's talk about runes. As I mentioned earlier, runes are broken into 5 types denoted by special symbols on the cards. Runes are played in the bottom row 4 slots under the Elestrals, with the exception of a Stadium rune, which is played in the top left of the field. I do want to mention the artwork on the Divine runes is not updated in the cards that I have, but the cards that you guys are purchasing through the pre-order link will have the final art for every card. Invoke runes, like Nectar of the Gods, are the Elestral source of spells or magic. They're played on your turn during the main phase and do not remain on the field after enchantment. They are enchanted, the effect takes place, and then the spirits are used and the invoke rune are sent to the underworld. Some of the most powerful rune effects come from the invoke runes. Let's say I wanted to play an invoke rune like Nectar of the Gods. I would announce to my opponent that I'm going to go through my spirit deck and I'm going to utilize a Wind Spirit and a Thunder Spirit to enchant Nectar of the Gods. At that point in time, the effect will take place and I will be able to draw 2 cards and then move Nectar of the Gods and the spirits to the underworld. Some invoke runes require specific spirit enchantments. Others, like Nectar of the Gods, have a universal symbol that means they can accept any type of spirit. Counter runes are played similarly to trap cards in other games. You must set a counter rune down, face down, for 1 turn in the rune zone before it can be activated. These counter runes can be played at any point during your or your opponent's turn after they've been set face down for 1 turn, and they can be used to create chain effects, which are resolved in reverse order. Much like invoke runes, these require an enchantment cost that is consumed and sent to the underworld once the effect is resolved. It's worth noting that even if a card is negated or destroyed, the enchantment effect still takes place unless stated otherwise, and the spirits are consumed and sent to the underworld. Because of this, it's important to consider your opponent's face down counter runes before making a big play. It's also worth noting that a counter rune is not enchanted unless it's flipped face up and activated. Let's say my opponent activates effect that requires them to search their deck and get a card. I can say I'm going to use a Wind Spirit and another Wind Spirit to enchant my Pandora's Box, which was previously sitting face down on the field. By doing this, I can activate the effect and activate a chain that is going to destroy that card from their hand. Again, the counter rune was face down on the field, and when I wanted to activate it in the right moment on my or my opponent's turn, I choose my spirits, I announce my enchantment, and after that, the card goes to the underworld once the effect is resolved. Artifact runes are enchanted and empower a specific Elestral on the field. It's worth noting that this icon has been updated, so you should see a new one on the screen. These typically add additional effects or power boosts to Elestrals, and they remain on the field until they're destroyed or the empowered Elestral is destroyed or removed from play. To be clear, you have to empower a particular Elestral in order to play an artifact rune, and the way you would play it is you would have an Elestral on the field, you would say, I'm going to use 2 Wind Spirits or 2 Lycoris to enchant my Bag of Winds and empower my Nimbug. Once this is on the field, it remains on the field until either the Nimbug is destroyed or the Bag of Winds is destroyed. If the Nimbug is ascended into something else, the Bag of Winds is also destroyed. It is only empowering the Nimbug. Stadium runes are runes that impact all Elestrals in play on both sides of the field, and only 1 Stadium rune may exist on the field at a time on either side of the field. Using a Stadium rune is an excellent way to give your Elestrals the advantage, or a way to disrupt your opponent by changing their stadium. These Stadium runes remain enchanted on the field, much like artifacts do. So from your hand, you would announce, I'm going to use a Wind Spirit to enchant my island of Aeolia. If my opponent had a Stadium rune on the field, it would go to the underworld along with the spirit enchanting it, and in this case, my stadium would take the place and affect all Elestrals on the field. And last but certainly not least, we have Divine Runes, and these are one of the most interesting mechanics within Elestrals. Have you ever wanted to use the power of the gods? Divine Runes give you just that. They are special rune cards that have low enchantment requirements, but can easily be enchanted with 3 or more spirits. By disenchanting or removing a spirit, you're able to activate the power of the gods, giving you an advantage in battle. Because these Divine Runes only need 1 spirit to remain enchanted, you can use their effect multiple times throughout the game. Divine Runes are also very effective with the Nexus Mechanic we'll talk about soon. How you use your Divine Runes will be one of the keys to success in Elestrals. So when a Divine Rune is played from your hand, you would state, I am going to enchant my Aeolus with a Lycoris or Wind Spirit. When it is enchanted, I can then use the effect to enchant an additional 2, or in the case of Aeolus, an additional 3 Wind Spirits. Because of its effect, I can then disenchant a Wind Spirit to the underworld to activate its last effect, allowing me to search my deck for a 1 Spirit Wind Elestral. I can use this disenchantment effect once per turn and get a lot of powerful cards out of my deck. It's also worth noting that once I explain Nexus, you'll see the potential of Divine Runes even more, and because it only has a 1 spirit requirement, this is a very fast way to get multiple spirits onto the field without having to lose the card that you initially played. One other thing that's very interesting to note is when you enchant an Elestral or an Elestral rune with the required spirits, generally they'll come from your spirit deck. However, there's one exception. Both invoke runes and counter runes can be enchanted using resources already on the field. But just keep in mind that if an Elestral or rune doesn't have the number of spirits enchanting it that it requires on the card, it'll be destroyed. This is a great strategy to use later in the game when resources are running low, or when an Elestral or rune is on the field and it's simply used up its effectiveness. To give you an example of this, I want to play my Nectar of the Gods, which requires a 2-spirit enchantment. I only have 1 spirit left in my spirit deck, but because this is an invoke rune in the later part of the game, I can use the 1 spirit from my spirit deck and use the spirit from Island of Aeolia, which will in turn destroy Island of Aeolia because it no longer has the spirit it needs to enchant my Nectar of the Gods and ultimately activate its effect. The same could be done with my Pandora's Box activating as a counter rune. This is a very niche situation, but it could be useful in the highest levels of competitive play, using the resources on the field to activate an invoke or counter rune at the very end of a game to turn the tide. So let's talk about how you actually win the game. As I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to win a game of Elestrals is to force your opponent to run out of spirits in their spirit deck. A player officially loses when they're forced to expend from their spirit deck and they don't have any spirits left to complete that action. This means you can have 0 spirits left in your deck and still actually win. As you can see here, I have 0 spirits left, but I still have a 3-spirit enchanted Stratamoth that is very powered up from its effect. If my opponent isn't able to defeat that or force me to expend any additional spirits, I can still win the game. It's just going to be really hard for me to play any additional cards at this point. A secondary win condition in Elestrals is the deck out. If you run out of cards in your main deck, and you cannot complete the next phase of drawing, whether your draw phase or a card effect forcing you to draw, you will lose the game. Elestrals is played in best 2 out of 3 format, and we find that most games run about 15 to 20 minutes long. Before I go any further into the terminology you'll want to understand for Elestrals, let's just do a quick refresher on the playmat itself. The top left is where you're going to play your Stadium Runes. These impact all players in the field and only one can exist on the field at a time. Stadium Runes cannot be set face down. The top 4 middle slots are for your Elestrals to be played in either attack position or defense position. You can't have more than 4 Elestrals on the field at once unless somehow they became an artifact rune, which is a very unique situation. The top right slot, that's going to be your Underworld, and that's going to involve any of the cards that you've used, discarded, even spirits that have been sent to the Underworld will exist in the same Underworld here in the top right. The Underworld is face up and it can be searched through either player at any time. My hope is to release card sleeves in packs of 60, featuring 2 different back arts, 20 for spirits and 40 for the main deck, for convenience in separating your spirits and your main deck from during gameplay and between games. The bottom left slot here is your spirit deck. It's face down and it contains 20 spirits to start the game. You can search your spirit deck and use them in any order to play your cards to enchant your Elestrals or your runes, but your opponent cannot search the spirit deck. They are allowed, however, to request how many spirits exist. We plan to use a d20 die to allow players to keep track of their spirit resource. The bottom 4 middle slots are for your runes. Invoke, counter, artifact, and divine runes take up these slots. Artifact and divine runes remain on the field for their enchantment, while invoke runes and counter runes are sent to the Underworld once their effect is resolved. Lastly, the bottom right is your main deck, which is going to consist of 40 cards face down. You can't just search through your deck unless a card effect states to do so, and you must always shuffle your deck after you search your deck from a card effect. Now let's talk about enchanting and some of the specifics around that. Enchanting is the key mechanic that allows you to play your Elestrals or runes to the field. During your turn, you can use 1 spirit to enchant an Elestral as per a normal enchantment. You're also allowed to use 1 spirit to re-enchant an existing Elestral on the field. Some Elestrals have effects that activate every time they receive an enchantment. To give you a basic example, let's say I want to enchant this Jolton. I will search my spirit deck and say I'm going to use a Zaptor or Thunder Spirit to enchant my Jolton. When Jolton is normal enchanted, for the first time his effect activates and I can search my deck for a Stadium. In the case of P-Gust here, let's say I wanted to enchant it. I would say I'm going to use a Lycoris or Wind Spirit to enchant my P-Gust. P-Gust has an effect where every time it receives a Wind Spirit, you can target and destroy a rune on the opponent's side of the field. Let's say P-Gust survived my opponent's turn, and instead of playing Elestral, I decided I was going to use my 1 spirit enchantment for my Elestrals to re-enchant my P-Gust. I can then activate P-Gust's effect a second time. Runes are a bit different though. You don't have any limitation to how many spirits in a turn you can use on your runes. So let's say I wanted to activate this Thunderstorm rune. I can use 2 spirits from my spirit deck to enchant Thunderstorm and resolve its effect. This would go to the underworld, and then I'm free to use another rune if I'd like to. I think the only thing worth noting here is you cannot re-enchant runes that exist on the field. That is something exclusive to Elestrals. However, you can nexus your spirits onto runes if you wish. Another thing worth noting is if you choose to forgo your normal Elestral enchantment in a turn, or choose to forgo re-enchanting an Elestral in that turn, you can actually choose to expend a spirit from your spirit deck to the underworld to give yourself an extra draw during that turn, and that can be done only during your main phase. Once you've completed that draw, you can no longer enchant a spirit on an Elestral monster for the remainder of that turn. Some powerful card effects allow you to do special enchantments. These do not take up your normal enchantment for the turn, and they always use the exact number of the enchantment requirement located on the card. For example, this Tadpuff, which actually isn't in any of the starter decks, can be special enchanted from your hand to the field in attack position by expending a water spirit. This is a very unique effect that allows you to special enchant an Elestral and then re-enchant it or enchant an additional Elestral that turn because it was special enchanted. As I mentioned earlier, an Elestral or a rune can remain enchanted on the field with the incorrect spirit elements. This is called a misenchantment. In the case of an Elestral, it'll still be able to use its attack and defense, but it has no effect. Runes that are misenchanted do not have effects. But in the case of artifacts, stadiums, and divine runes, there's a deep level of strategy that can be used with Nexus Mechanic, which I'll promise I'll get to soon. So to give you an example, this Sirikun is enchanted again with a fire and a wind spirit, and its effect does not work, but it can remain on the field because it has 2 spirits enchanting it. This Bag of Winds is the same. I enchanted it with 2 spirits, but they are incorrect, so it exists in the field but does not have an effect. Disenchanting is an act that can only happen through card effect. In the current state of Elestrals, your opponent does not have any ability to disenchant your Elestrals, but some card effects allow you to remove a spirit from them to activate their effect. This can be incredibly useful if you have extra spirits enchanting an Elestral or rune, but sometimes the effect is powerful enough to justify enchanting, like Boombat here. In the example of Boombat, I can use a Thunder Spirit to enchant my Boombat. Boombat's effect allows me to disenchant a Thunder Spirit from Boombat to destroy an opponent's Elestral on the field. I can disenchant this spirit, ultimately destroying my Boombat to the underworld to destroy an Elestral on the other side of the field. If I was able to re-enchant my Boombat at some point in the game and have 2 Thunder Spirits on it, I can disenchant a Thunder Spirit from Boombat and keep it alive on the field and still activate its effect. That's where Nexus is crucial. Every Elestral in the game has an effect or an ability that can be activated, and as a reminder, the Elestral must be enchanted with the proper number of spirits to exist and the proper element type of spirits in order for their effect to be activated. Effects can be activated typically during the main phase once per turn, or during an action like receiving an enchantment. Other Elestral effects are activated at all times, but unless a card action states otherwise, an Elestral's effect can only be activated once per turn, usually denoted with the text "you can." So in the context of this Boombat, it says you can disenchant a Thunder Spirit from this Boombat. I cannot use that effect multiple times in one turn on the same Boombat, but I can use it once per turn during my main phase. In a contrary situation, P-Gust says every time P-Gust receives a wind enchantment, you can target and destroy a rune on your opponent's field. So every single time P-Gust receives a wind enchantment, that effect is going to activate. In Elestrals, you can ascend to more powerful monsters. Many Elestrals require 2 or 3 spirit enchantments to exist in the field, like this Stratomoth, and thus will require the use of card effects to help them get there. A normal ascension takes the place of your normal enchantment, and is always accompanied by a spirit from the spirit deck in the act of enchanting. It's worth noting that when an Elestral or Elestrals are used to ascend, the Elestrals themselves are sent to the underworld, but the spirits are used to enchant the ascended, more powerful Elestral. If an artifact is empowering an Elestral that is used to ascend, the artifact is sent to the underworld. It does not empower the new ascended Elestral. To give you an example here, I have a P-Gust on the field with 2 wind spirits. I have not enchanted on my turn. I can declare that I'm going to use a wind spirit to enchant and ascend my P-Gust into Stratomoth. Now, P-Gust's effect does not activate because this is all done at one point in the ascension, so it doesn't get its effect again, but it allows me to combine these spirits on the field to ultimately ascend to my Stratomoth. Let's say I had a Nimbug on the field and a P-Gust on the field, both with 1 spirit, and I did not do an enchantment or an ascension this turn. I can do the exact same thing. I can declare a wind spirit to ascend my Nimbug and my P-Gust into a Stratamoth and combine all of these spirits on the field onto one Elestral. While from a lore perspective, many Elestrals have visual ascension paths, like Nimbug to Siracoon to Stratamoth, but it's important to note that you can ascend any Elestral to a stronger Elestral. The spirit number is what matters most when it comes to ascension. It's also worth mentioning that you can ascend to a 1 enchantment require Elestral as well. There may be some unique situations where this could be helpful, like our friend Boombat. So for example, I could have a 3 Thunder Spirit enchanted Stratamoth on the field and ascend my Stratamoth with an additional spirit into a Boombat. Now that may not make a lot of sense, but what I just did is I just gave my Boombat 4 spirits to work with, and then I can use his ability to disenchant a spirit and destroy a card on the field. I'm sure you can get creative and find some unique situations of when ascending to a 1 spirit or 2 spirit from something stronger would actually make a lot of sense. One thing I should mention here is, let's say I had this Elechick and I was going to ascend into a P-Gust, like that same exact example. I would use a spirit to make the ascension take place, and P-Gust's effect would only activate the 1 time because it's receiving the Wind Spirit through the ascension. The other pieces were already there, so those do not count as additional effects for the P-Gust in this context. I just want to clarify here that any instance of a card that has an effect that says every time this P-Gust receives a Wind enchantment, when you're doing a Nexus or an Ascension, that is considered 1 time, even if there's more than 1 spirit involved. So in that example I just gave of P-Gust, where it ultimately received more than 1 Wind Spirit, because it is all happening in 1 action, the effect only takes one time. As the same would be Nexus. If you were to Nexus 2 Wind Spirits onto a P-Gust, the P-Gust effect would only activate 1 time because the Nexus mechanic is all functioning simultaneously and it's receiving 2 Wind enchantments, but it's happening at 1 time. Many Elestrals have effects that allow you to special ascend. Special ascends do not take up your normal enchantment during the turn and can be a powerful way to get the strongest Elestrals on the field. So in the case of Siracoon here, it has an ability where I can expend 2 Wind Spirits to ultimately special ascend to Stratamoth from my deck or from my hand. To activate that as special ascension, I will always have to get 1 additional spirit from my spirit deck to make that ascension happen. The Siracoon would go to the underworld, and ultimately my Stratamoth would end up with the 3 spirits that it has. Just like I showed you with the Siracoon, many card effects in Elestrals require you to expend a spirit to activate that effect. Expending is the action of taking the spirit from your spirit deck and sending it to the underworld. Some card effects may even force your opponent to expend a spirit. It's important to note that in the current state of Elestrals, you have full control over which spirits are expended or used at any given time. This is to ensure that you have the full decisions on how your spirit deck resource is used. If you or your opponent are ever forced to expend a spirit, regardless of who activated that card effect, you choose which spirit you're going to expend, not your opponent. Now it's finally talk about the Nexus mechanic. Nexus is a very unique set of effects in Elestrals that allows for deep level of strategy and card effects never seen before. The act of a Nexus is a simultaneous disenchantment and re-enchantment of a spirit to another Elestral or rune on the field. Cards like Circle the Sky allow you to Nexus your spirits to change resources, activate effects multiple times, or prepare for an ascension. Mastering Nexus is the key to Elestrals. Nexus can only be activated through specific card effects, and it's important to remember that if you Nexus a spirit off of a rune or Elestral, and it no longer has the proper number of spirits needed, the original card is also destroyed. In the context of Exaltair here, it says that I can Nexus up to 2 Wind Spirits on my field. If I successfully Nexus any spirits from that effect, my opponent has to expend 2 spirits, which is 10% of their life essentially. So I can say that I'm going to Nexus the Wind Spirit from my Island of Aeolia onto my Exaltair. I can simultaneously disenchant and re-enchant that Wind Spirit, and ultimately, because my island no longer has the right spirit number, it is going to be destroyed. I can do that with my Stratamoth as well, and Nexus that over once per turn if I wanted to make Exaltair stronger or to activate these various effects. This is where those Divine Runes really come into play, because they will often have 3 or more spirits enchanting them because of their card effect, but they only need 1 to exist in the field. So I'm able to use the Nexus effect to move this spirit anywhere on my board, onto the island, onto the Stratamoth, onto the Exaltair through Exaltair's effect, and still keep my Divine Rune Aeolus on the field for the next turn to either Nexus again or do something else. Mastering Nexus through your artifact runes, your stadiums, and everything in between your Divine Runes is going to allow you to get some of the most combos and the most deck potential destruction, field destruction. Some of the best effects in the game are tied to the Nexus mechanic. The last thing I want to mention about Nexus is if you have a card effect that states that you can Nexus up to 2 Wind Spirits on the field, you can get each of those Wind Spirits from different sources. So in the example I showed, I could use Exaltair's effect to take a Wind Spirit from Stratamoth and a Wind Spirit from Island of Aeolia and Nexus those onto the Exaltair. Just remember that if a card no longer has the proper enchantment requirement, number of spirits on it, it gets destroyed. So the Island of Aeolia and the Stratamoth would be destroyed in that example. Elestrals is broken down into 4 phases of gameplay. The draw phase, where you start your turn by drawing a card. When a game starts, both players draw 5 cards. The person who goes first actually skips their draw phase, but from there on out, players are required to draw 1 card each turn during their draw phase, unless a card negates that. So you would roll your d20 with your opponent, you would see who had the highest number, that person chooses whether they want to go first or second. Both players draw 5 cards. The player who's going first does not draw, they play their turn out. They can't attack directly, but they can enchant Elestrals, they can play runes, they can do everything else, but they just can't attack on turn 1. And then the second player goes for their first turn, they would start the turn by drawing, and then they would begin the game. The main phase is where most of the Elestral effects are activated. This is when you can enchant your Elestrals, you can normal enchant your Elestrals, you can special ascend or ascend your Elestrals, you can set your counter runes face down, you can also activate your divine runes by enchanting them, and pretty much everything. Most of the action in the game does take place during your main phase. You can also change the position of an Elestral on the field from attack to defense or vice versa if it wasn't enchanted or special enchanted on that turn. Battle phase is where the combat happens. In the current state of Elestrals, only counter runes can be played during the battle phase, and they must be played face down for 1 turn prior to activating. A few Elestral effects have effects that activate in the battle phase as well, but most Elestrals can attack once per turn. Once all attacks have been concluded, the player moves to the end phase, and it becomes the other player's turn, starting at their draw phase. Once the battle phase concludes, no additional cards can be played until your opponent's turn, unless stated by a card effect. There are a few circumstances where cards work in the end phase. So I'm going to give you a little breakdown on how a game goes, but again, we'll have some of this footage on the channel as well for you to watch. You'll start out with your main deck of 40 cards on one side and your spirit deck on the left side of 20 cards. I recommend before every game starts, you count your spirit deck to ensure you have 20, and you can use your d20 to start at 20 and ultimately work your way down. You roll your d20 and determine who's going to go first. The higher number gets to choose who's going to go first. Let's say I'm going to go first. I'm going to draw my 5 cards that I have, and then I'm going to play out my turn. I move to my main phase. I'm going to use 2 spirits, and I can choose which spirits I want to enchant Nectar of the Gods. That allows me to draw 2 cards, and then the Nectar of the Gods and the spirits ultimately go to the underworld. It's the first turn, so my opponent doesn't have anything on the field, so I'm actually going to use this opportunity to play a Wind Spirit, and I'm going to enchant my Nimbug to the field in defense position. I can then use Nimbug's effect to expend a Wind Spirit to the underworld to search my deck and special ascend to a Siracoon. So I'll look my deck for the Siracoon, which is a very powerful combo, especially in the early game. I'll grab my Siracoon. Because I use the search function, I have to show it to my opponent. I have to shuffle my deck, and then I'm gonna grab the spirit I need to special ascend to the Siracoon. In this case, I'm gonna put the Siracoon in defense position, and I'm gonna have it on the field like that. I don't have anything to do otherwise, but I'm going to set my Invoke Rune Thunderstorm face down as a bluff for my opponent to think I have a counter rune and make them think twice. At that point, because I don't have a battle phase, I'm going to end my turn. Now my opponent is going to play their cards. They're going to draw their 6th card, or their first draw phase card, and they're going to go through their turn, playing Invoke Runes, counter runes, face down, divine runes, stadiums, etc., enchanting 1 Elestral, and so on and so forth. Let's say that all they do is play 1 Elestral on the field, face up in defense position, and they pass their turn to me. I now can draw, and during my draw phase, I can expend 2 Wind Spirits to special ascend my Siracoon into a Stratamoth. You can very quickly see how strong Stratamoth is. I expend the 2 Wind Spirits, I search my deck for the Stratamoth, I enchant an additional spirit because of the Ascension, as I normally would, and now I have a specially ascended Stratamoth with 3 spirits on the field. Because I searched for the Stratamoth, I do have to shuffle the deck. That's a special ascension, so I still have my ascension for this turn. You can see that this is a pretty powerful strategy. I can set my Pandora's box face down, and if I wanted to, I can say I'll use 2 Thunder Spirits to enchant my Thunderstorm to destroy an opponent's rune if they have one. That could be a really powerful effect to allow my Stratamoth to stay very strong on the field. I use a special ascension, so now what I can do is I'm going to use a Thunder Spirit to enchant my Astrabbit to the field. Every time Ask Rabbit receives a Thunder enchantment, I can look at the top 3 cards of my deck and add one to my hand. I'm going to take the Falacane for more control. The other 2 go back, and then we're going to shuffle. From here, I don't have much else I can do outside of enter my battle phase, so I would enter battle phase and conduct battle with my opponent, at which point the battle phase concludes and I end my turn. You'll repeat this gameplay loop until one of the players runs out of spirits or opportunities of things to do, or they run out of their deck. And that, my friends, is how you play the game of Elestrals. I know this was a super long video, but I wanted to cover everything and cover it multiple times. I do think that Elestrals is a super easy game to pick up. Once you play the game, I find it very, very simple, and anyone who's tried it has been able to pick it up in 1 or 2 games. So hopefully you feel the same way. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I do plan to provide an updated how to play guide before the Kickstarter launch. So if there's anything I can clarify or anything like that, please let me know so I can make the guide even better next time. I want to thank you guys so much, and don't forget to pick up your pre-order of the starter decks for Elestrals, available for just 72 hours after this video goes up. We've done deck profiles for each of the 5 decks, as well as put up some gameplay matches as well, so you can see Elestrals in action against real opponents. Thank you so much. I can't wait for the tournaments. I can't wait for everything else. This is going to be a wild journey. I'm so thankful to have you. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to show you guys more.